Welcome to Push Go, a podcast presented by Plum, where we highlight the defining moments that impact how we live and work. Today, I'm joined by Steve Blair. He's the founder and lead advisor for the Culture Collaborative. He's a passionate SHRM certified people and culture executive leader, and he's an advisor with experience across multiple organizations, including Procter Gamble, Girardi Chocolate, Walsworth Publishing, and he also served as the Vice President of People and Culture for the Harvest Group. Steve recently launched the Culture Collaborative. It's an advisory service helping organizations strengthen and scale their culture and people operations. Today, you'll hear how Steve built a career of a work hobby through a steady drip of people who pointed out the work he came alive doing. I'm excited to have Steve Blair on the podcast. Steve, welcome.
Thanks, Rick. Glad to be here.
Hey, excited to have you here. I can't wait to start out with the most important, pivotal time in your life. A 12-year-old DJ was a Mr. Steve Blair. So tell me about this DJ world in your life.
Man, oh man. I didn't know we were going here right out of the gate. No, so fun. I'll try to make it a short story, but I was a United Methodist growing up. We had dances.
Wow.
We invited other churches to come over, and it was the day of a dance that we were having at church, and the youth pastor said, "Oh, we don't have a DJ. Anybody here know a DJ?" And my friend said, "Steve is."
Yeah, you've got skills.
Well, what I had was the most cassette tapes of anybody in the youth group. I had the most cassette tapes, so I got nominated. I DJ'd that night, and caught the bug. And so at age 13, I was traveling around Kansas City DJing high school dances. My mom was driving me in her station wagon to my gig and then to pick me up and bring me back home.
That's so good. And so in the information down below, we're going to make sure we link to definitions and Wikipedia of cassette tapes.
Yes.
To make sure people get this.
Yes.
So that was kind of the beginning of your world, but you're going to jump past into our P&G world because you and I have something in common. We both worked 17 years at Procter Gamble.
Isn't that crazy?
17 years. Isn't that something? Yeah.
And then must be a magic window.
Must be a window. It's kind of crazy. But let's talk a little bit about that career, less about how you got to P&G, but you and I were discussing how at that time at Procter, and we kind of talked through how there's a generalist aspect. You get to try a lot of different things. You started getting a taste of or starting to get a feel for what could be the sweet spot of what was really going to drive you while you were totally focused on a separate kind of a career trajectory with P&G.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit about that, how you started to get a taste into this world and how it started to drive you a little bit.
Yeah, I would say for 15 of the 17 years, I was on what would be the most traditional development path, marketing major sales roles.
Classic P&G sales role.
Got to come to the Super Bowl of retail on the Walmart team pretty early on in my career. And so I was doing fun work selling diapers to Walmart, which at the time was the largest global business they had at the largest retailer, which was crazy time. But that's what I was doing. But the whole time, my whole career at P&G, one thing they do really, really well is they give people opportunities to have what I call work hobbies. And
that's a great word. So it's a work hobby. It's not, you might have something outside of work, but this is a work hobby. Okay.
It's the only way I know how to describe it because it felt like I was doing a second job but not getting paid for it. And so I've called it my work hobby, but the work hobbies they let me in particular have was to be involved with campus recruiting and to be involved with sales training. And so I would always volunteer to facilitate a new hire training session, or I would volunteer to go on campuses and conduct interviews. And so for all 17 of the years, that was a hobby on the side. And some people at P&G get to do work hobbies like support the United Way, and they get really involved in a charitable cause that the company is involved in. My particular work hobby was recruiting and training. That was in addition to my job selling diapers to Walmart. But it was an opportunity for me to kind of tap into other parts of my personality that I really liked. And so much so that my last 2 years there's a requirement at a certain level that you have to do a broadening assignment. And the leader of North America came to me and said, hey, most people will do an assignment in finance or marketing. I'd like you to run sales training and campus recruiting for North America as your full-time gig at P&G.
So that leader saw in you, because from a hobby perspective, you were doing it really well. They could see the passion. So the beautiful thing is they saw that in you to go ask, as opposed to you having to negotiate to be able to do.
Sure. Yeah. It was a total surprise to me. I would have, most people, like I said, would go do a finance 2-year rotation or something. And they had a specific need that the traditional person to lead sales training would be someone in their last job, as they're like heading off into retirement and we want to impart wisdom. He specifically looked at me because I not only did the work hobbies of training and recruiting, but I had been on the Walmart team for a number of years, and we'd never had anybody in sales training that had been out in the field and worked on what at the time was a burgeoning retailer. Like Walmart was fairly new, growing rapidly. And so he saw in me the passion I had, and he saw in me the unique experiences that I've had. And those two things came together in that role. And I would tell you that collision between commercial perspective and passion for people would show up multiple times in my story.
So when did it hit you, a month in, 2 months in, that you thought, wow, this could be a career change, or this could be something I would now pursue, versus treating it as a 2-year hobby, then I go back into the sales track? Because again, you've got a successful sales track.
Yep.
And all outside folks be looking at, hey, Steve, this is where you should go. But you're starting to get a feel for the recruiting side of things, the HR side of things. So when did it hit, or was it a moment or something specific that happened that says, wow, not only can I do this, but I really want to do this long term?
Yeah, I would say it definitely didn't happen in the first few months because, as you said, there was a plan. And I wasn't about to change the plan, and I didn't even think I could change the plan, right? I will tell you specifically, it was about 1.5 years into my 2-year assignment where I was at dinner having chips and salsa in a nasty Mexican restaurant in downtown Cincinnati with a friend of mine now, Matthew Kelly, an author. He really posed the question, what do you really want to be doing? And at the time, I hadn't really thought that was even an option, to leave the very predictable career path inside P&G and either do full-time people and culture work inside P&G or even outside of P&G. I never thought that was even an option until he really pushed me to think about what do I really want. And unfortunately, I can't tell you that it was like an epiphany moment and I left that restaurant and my career was forever changed. That was the probably second or third little drip into my new perspective around what happens when people can come alive at work and find what they're really passionate about. That was one more drip, which would turn into be a 7-year process before I eventually ended up getting to do this full-time for a full-time career focus.
So I love that concept of a drip. That sounds like that could be a Steveism, the
Maybe,
little drip.
Yeah.
So let's speak to a little bit about that. So you're in the HR world, recruiting. Matthew knew enough about you to ask the right question. I mean, it wasn't a generic, hey, so what do you like to do? I mean, he's asking it for a reason.
Yeah.
You realize that first drip, it starts to hit. So you're getting a little bit of a cadence. So speak more about the dripping effect. I mean, do you recognize this is the beginning of a different journey, or you just look back at it and say, gosh, I could see where these drips happened in my life?
Yeah, I would say I have very distinct chapters in my story that don't necessarily line up with job changes as what a normal story of a career flow. It was really when I would have a realization, and then that would eventually turn into maybe a different career opportunity months later, a year later. So it wasn't like they were all tied to job changes, but there are distinct chapters and distinct people and distinct conversations that were very much drips along the way. And I really think it took 7 years of me continuing to do primarily commercial roles while continuing to build these muscles and people and culture before it became a full-time thing. And I would say that as that happened, I found myself being attracted to job opportunities and company opportunities that had a need for both. Okay. They had a need for my commercial experience, but they also had a unique need for recruiting, or a unique need to help embolden the culture of an organization. And one thing I learned early on that I really want everybody to hopefully learn early on is the power of tools to help you do some self-discovery. And it was in that process that I really felt like I understood my wiring was that I really like to be uniquely needed. Mm-hmm. And anytime a career opportunity would present itself, the only filter I had was, am I going to be uniquely needed for this role? And that's how it happened, where every one of them involved commercial leadership and a need to recruit and build a team, a need to build out an office for a company in a different city, the need to do a training reinvention in a direct sales organization. All of those lined up with that thing I knew about myself that I had come to know, which is that I really like to be uniquely needed, and I really like to be uniquely needed on the people side of the equation.
Okay, so that's way too much to unpack with just one more, comment here. But I think that's important for folks to understand, is that you didn't just leave P&G the next day and say, ta-da, I'm this HR, human resources, people, culture person. And I think it's important, as I'm thinking about your career, you stayed with what you were really successful at, but looking for opportunities that would help you build and grow with where your passion was becoming. And that was a fair process, but it was a 7-year overnight success story. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. And that's important for people to hear, because it's so often you think, well, he had this epiphany, Matthew Kelly asked a question, I quit P&G the next day, and poof, here I am. That's not how life works. Yeah. So let's talk about those next, quote, 7 years. You did decide to leave P&G. Yep. And you had multiple assignments that got you to a point, multiple companies that got you to a point that you had a dream job. So kind of briefly walk us through a few of those. Yeah. Get us to that dream job, because we're not quite to that defining moment just yet, but we're close.
Yeah, we're getting there. Like most things in life, it takes me a long time to get there. I want to buy a new pair of shoes. It takes me 3 years to decide which ones to buy. So yes, I would say that that decision, it was not like I woke up and said, I'm going to pursue a people and culture career. Mm-hmm. And it took me 7 years to get there. That's not how it happened. Mm-hmm. I didn't set out looking for people and culture roles immediately. I set out looking for roles where I knew I could have success, where I was uniquely needed, but that had people and culture elements that were obvious over time. And so I had an opportunity to go work for Ghirardelli Chocolate to build out all of their national accounts teams across the country. So I got to open some sales offices. I got to recruit the whole team.
Build out means recruiting and the whole thing.
Awesome.
You're like,
but the primary job was selling chocolate,
which you were an expert at.
That's right.
What you did. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say an expert.
But listen. You're an expert at that. Whether or not you were the best in the world is another. But you truly
I had success.
Knew that. You knew how to do that.
Yeah. So that was a great opportunity, and then a personal need arose that we kind of wanted to get back towards Kansas City, and I had an opportunity to join a company completely outside of the CPG industry, which is also part of my story, where I got to lead commission-driven sales organization that I'd never done before. Okay. So it's not like I went into that knowing how to do it, but I went in knowing that the culture needed a refresh. The culture needed some new energy, and that's where I saw that unique angle of I could be a sales organization leader. I have some skills in that. I have some experiences, but not in that industry. But they really need some help culturally, and so that role was another one of the drips along the way, where I realized, man, this is really fun stuff. And I would say probably at the end of that role, it started clicking that this might be a full-time passion, not just a work hobby.
Was anyone encouraging you at that time to be more focused on the people side, Are people pouring into you, or is this still you processing this and gosh, I really am not only starting to like this, but I'm getting pretty good at it?
Yeah, I would say I did have people pouring in, dripping as we talked. Not necessarily to go into people, into HR, but to do something that I'm passionate about. Paul Smith and I were sitting having a glass of wine before he decided to leave P&G, and we were both talking about what we might do next. And he really challenged me to, whatever it is, do something you're passionate about.
Okay.
And so, just like Matthew, just like Paul, I've had people along the way that haven't necessarily said, you need to do people and culture full time. They were saying you need to do things that you're passionate about, and you seem to be passionate about people.
Okay.
So that gets us to the phone call in 2015 from one more person who had been dripping into my journey, and that was Bill Weitzman. And
you and Bill have known each other
from P&G,
from the Walmart
right.
team days. Okay,
that's right. And he called and said, "Hey, we're growing at such a rate that we think we might need a full-time people and culture leader." They had someone doing it 3 days a week on a less than full-time schedule, and she was killing it. Like, she set the foundation for the company culture that Harvest has today. But they needed full-time, and she was looking at staying home. And so he called and said the magic words: "We have an opportunity, and we think you're the only person we can think of that can do it." And as I mentioned earlier, being uniquely needed is how I'm wired.
That feel really encouraging.
It did. And so here I am with a phone call from somebody I deeply respect, who had an opportunity that sounded like it was my dream job, and they were saying, "We can't think of anyone else that can run this mountain with us. Will you consider coming back to Northwest Arkansas?" Because I was living in Kansas City at the time.
But you're in Kansas City, killing it in company. Now the third company, you're killing it over here. That's not an easy yes and just go run down the street and go work with the startup. So as you guys are processing as a family, as you're talking to mentors, do you have anyone trying to talk you out of this, or you have people encouraging you, saying, "Hey, you really should go for this"?
Yeah, I would say no one that knew me well was talking me out of joining Harvest Group and taking that particular opportunity. I had people talking me out of moving to Kansas City, trying to talk me out of moving to Kansas City. I had a really good friend who's in recruiting, that said, "Look, you can't be gone more than 2 years. If you're gone more than 2 years, I can't help you. I can't get you back here if you want to come back." And I had passed the 2-year mark in Kansas City.
Yeah,
so
it was a shelf life.
That's right. And so, so it wasn't that people were telling me don't do it or be careful. It was me saying, "Are you really sure you want to leave what you're good at, what you've had opportunities to prove yourself over the years, and go full time into a department or a function," which old school is called human resources, that, let's be honest, hasn't always had the greatest reputation for having the top level talent in an organization. And so that's what I was struggling with is, am I going to go a full-time pivot into a function that I had never had any formal training in? I just knew I loved it.
Right.
And so the fact that it was Harvest Group, the fact that it was Bill and Ross Cully that made the phone call, I said yes. And so that's probably the most pivotal moment, the result of all of the drips along the way, which is, hey, you get to now do your work hobby and get paid for it full time. And you're going to do it in a place that needs you, and in a place that is an incredible foundation to build from.
Felt like you were coming home.
That's right. And felt like I was coming home I was coming home our third and final time to Northwest Arkansas.
Okay. A little bit of trivia for you. My major in school, personnel and industrial relations.
Nice.
Back in the day, before there was an HR people kind of thing.
Industrial relations.
Exactly, because in those days, I'm old enough to say those days, you had to understand the union side of things. Because if you're going to get out, and I was coming to Procter, you had union plants, non-union plants, and so you really had to understand the industrial relations side of it, the labor law, and then the personnel side, obviously the HR. But a bit of trivia. So I mentioned that because now that you're coming in, it's not a hobby, and this really is that defining moment. You're pushing go into this new career. It wasn't like you could ad lib anymore and kind of do this. You had to become a student.
Yes.
So now that you're here, everyone expects you to be the guy. What did you have to do to start that that trajectory of being truly an expert like you were in the commercial sales side of things, where you could argue in your sleep, you could teach it, you could train it, and you had been doing this, but this is now just Steve, and you need to be a student of this. So what were some of the steps you took to become the best that you could possibly be in this world?
Yeah, I would say, and they were different steps than what it took to have success on the commercial side. On the commercial side, I participated in and attended training that was prepared for me to grow my skills. In this role, to your point, I was flying solo. And so the good thing is that I was alive. Like I came alive when I got into this role, and that made me want to learn. And so I really set out on a journey to study people that are doing it well, to talk to people that have done it and failed, to I pursued a certification through the Society for Human Resources Management, all those things. But it was from a heart position of, I get to do this. How amazing is this? And so I just wanted to absorb everything. And of course, that was 7 years ago. Podcasts were becoming a thing. So I started becoming addicted to a lot of podcasts. So
if I looked on your YouTube history, it would have all these people things, and everyone else might have sports or whatever, and you've got this huge HR people.
Yes.
Okay.
Mamie Canfield. There's a lot of them out there. Or maybe Canfor Stewart. So I became a student, but a different kind of student. You know what it's like? It's like when you go to high school, you have to go to class. And when you get to college, you realize that I'm paying for this, and this is important. There's new stakes, and all of a sudden you want to go to class. That's what this was. I had some of the best sales training in the world at P&G, and it helped. But this was a different scenario in that I was actually getting to pursue knowledge and experience in an area that was clearly my sweet spot and made me feel like I was coming alive at work.
So for that, and so how long was that tenure at Harvest?
7 years.
So for that 7-year period, and I know even over the last year or so, you started giving back. You had various groups you coordinated with other people, director of people and culture in the area. So at year 1, 2, when did you kind of feel like you could sit across the table from someone and felt like you were a peer again? Because in the sales world, I could argue you could sit across the table with virtually anyone and feel like you were a competent peer.
Sure.
Did it take a year or two? What did it take to feel like I'm comfortable and I can now pour back into that world?
Yeah. Man, Rick, that's a great question. And I'm hoping I can answer it without causing offense to some folks, right? Yeah. I would say that it took me about 2 years to feel confident to sit across the table from pioneers in the space of people and culture and those that were doing innovative things. Day one, I felt capable of sitting across the table from people doing traditional HR, right? I would go to, I still belong to the local organization, and there are people there that have been in HR for 20 years, and I felt like I could hang in those conversations
because you had been performing those processes for a decade or so, and
no,
you understood
no official skills or
and,
training, but I'd been doing the work. It took me probably 2 years to feel like I could have a conversation with the folks that lead the podcast that I listen to, and the folks that are really pushing the envelope on what people and culture looks like, which is not compliance. It's not traditional human resources. All of that is very important. But it's really the folks that were pushing the envelope on how do organizations find and attract and retain the best possible talent. And that's just different than traditional HR.
So you're feeling good. You're a couple of years. You're in that mode. So let's talk a little bit about the giving back aspect of it, because I'll make a joke about this, but you're also going to get to a point even in this 7-year period where you really are that good at it. It's not that you can do it in your sleep, but the challenge of learning more, you're always a learning person, learning organization. But I know a lot about what makes you tick today is you're also giving back, helping others in the community. So let's speak to a little bit about that. You're driving it. You've now hit 50 people, 100 people. It's growing, but you've got things in place. You have people now. You have an organization built around it. Speak to a little bit about Steve giving back to help others begin thinking of that role as people and culture versus just running salaries and running recruiting and what that looks like.
Yeah. I'd say there's a couple of components to that. Part of my role at Harvest Group around the recruiting aspect was there were a lot of Chick-fil-A breakfasts and a lot of bowling alley breakfasts when they were open during the week. And so in between those breakfasts where I would be meeting with potential candidates for Harvest, I would always accept invitations from folks that weren't necessarily trying to get a job at Harvest, but were having a career moment or thinking about doing something different, or maybe they wanted to get into a role like mine. I had 2 or 3 breakfasts with folks that expressed interest in, man, how did you break into that? And I said, well, it kind of took me 20 years to do that. But I can tell you that 3 of those people are in people and culture roles today.
Oh, wow.
Not anything to do with me other than going to breakfast and talking with someone like me who had done it, who had made that transition. So that's one way, is like the informal one-on-one with people. The other thing I've really enjoyed is I got involved in a really small group of folks that are doing a similar role at similar size and growth stage companies. We get together once a month on Thursday mornings, and that has been an amazing experience because we're all going through similar things as we go on the growth trajectory from 25 to 100 to 200 people. And so that has been a really fun experience to get peer feedback, to get peer coaching, to talk about issues. And imagine, Rick, 3 years ago, we sat around a table and talked about how do we think about mask mandates in an office? How do we do vaccination tracking in an office environment?
Once in 100 year
how do we maintain a culture when we don't get to see each other? That group was really important for me during that time window. Wow. So that idea of the cohort of a small group of people doing similar work and in similar passionate organizations led to part of what I'm doing now.
So that's interesting. So as you think through that, I mean, we could kind of stop the story now. It was interesting, great conversation with Steve. But you left.
Yeah.
Okay, you left the dream job.
And dream company.
And the dream company. You left everything. It was focused. You're living the dream. Everything is great. And then you're like, nah, I think I might do something different. So let's talk about how that, not only that thought came in, but what made you begin to at least become asking yourself the question, is this really the long-term place for me? Is this really what I want to be doing long-term? Not necessarily the avenue of people and culture, but working within the structure of a corporation and the structure along those lines. Because if people were looking at you today, would say, why would you leave that?
Yeah.
Why would you do this?
You idiot.
So let's talk about it. So without telling exactly what you're doing today,
sure.
Walk us through that last year or so, because it took a period of time. You said, hey, I think I'm going to do something different.
Yeah.
And so when did that begin?
About 18 months ago, I would say. And here's, as I look back, and I love to look back and try to explain why things happened, as opposed to question, what happened. I look back now, and it's pretty clear to me that it all comes back to what I talked about earlier of how I'm wired. Okay. I started having a realization that I wasn't as uniquely needed at Harvest Group at that stage in their growth. The 25 to 200 people growth that I was so honored to get to lead, I was uniquely needed everywhere. They needed recruiting processes. They needed training. They needed a compensation strategy that they could write down on paper. All of those things were things I was passionate about, and I could uniquely deliver. I felt myself more and more looking at the landscape of what the company needed, and they still need lots of things, but they weren't things that I feel uniquely equipped to do. And at this stage in my career, I've reached a point where I want to be uniquely needed, and that's what makes me come alive. And I knew that I could do the work. I wouldn't be as alive, and I wouldn't be as effective at delivering the results that I really like to deliver, because I had kind of reached what I describe as the boundary of what I was uniquely needed for at Harvest. And so it was through that process that I started considering okay, then where would I be uniquely needed? I now have this unique experience of switching full stop from a sales career to a people and culture and HR career. And it started becoming clear to me that who needed me and what I also loved doing was that first chapter of my work at Harvest Group, that coming alongside a passionate, principled founder as a running partner. I realized at that point, I don't want to be a CEO anywhere. I don't want to lead anything. I want to come alongside the leader and bring the processes and the tools needed to help them grow quickly, because they're growing quickly already. That's going to happen. What we don't want to see happen is in 3 years, they've tripled their head count and they look back and say, but what do we want our culture to look like? And luckily, that wasn't Harvest. Harvest set out from day one to build the culture they wanted to work in, and then they built on that as we grew. So I realized there wasn't a lot uniquely that I could contribute anymore at Harvest, and there were lots of organizations and lots of founders that could need what I was uniquely skilled at and passionate about, which is helping them scale from small to mid-sized companies. And so it was through that process that I finally realized, you know what, I think I can take a different path. And so the chapter I'm in right now, Rick, is I'm exploring what that path is. Okay. I'm working with a couple of companies now, doing some really fun advisory work with them, which is exactly what I set out to do. I'm launching a cohort of like-minded people and culture leaders that can sit around a table once a month for more than just a breakfast and really build professional development and work through really tough issues together. But I'm also really trying to figure out if what I'm uniquely gifted at is going deep inside an organization like I did at Harvest. And do I join another organization for the next 3 to 5 years, 3 to 7 years, and help a principled founder lead passionately through rapid growth. And so welcome to my current life.
Yeah, well, sounds to me like you became CEO of your own company, but hey, it's another story for another day. But I heard, I was at an Endeavor event and was listening to the founder of Kayak, and he walked through, he said, in organizations, you need starters, growers, and runners. He said it's really difficult for a starter to become a runner. So starters, the hacking, you're just kind of figuring things out. Growers are scaling. Runners take it and say, okay, we're going to create processes and just make it a well-oiled machine. He said it's really, really difficult for a runner to become a starter. And it sounds like what you're describing in your world is that you realize that maybe it's not so much a starter, but you're a grower. You're a scaler.
Yes.
And you reach a point in that S-curve that says, gosh, it's time to maintain. It's time to bring the right person in, and you go back over and grow. And he even talked to the effect of that if you can find a good grower, find them and get them, because they're only going to last about 3 years. Because you reach a point where I've taken you where you need to go. I want to go somewhere else.
And there are all new resources that are needed at that next chapter.
Totally. So I like that in that process. So you're a grower. I love that.
I love that analogy, Rick, because I love when I have vocabulary to describe what it is I'm feeling. And man, that's a big gift for me today. So thank you. I love that.
Yeah, appreciate that. And so as we think about that today and in the world that you're in, if someone wanted to join the cohort, wanted to have that cup of coffee for that career counseling, or to have that Matthew Kelly question, which is, Matthew,
what do you really want to do?
If you want to sit down, I want to sit down with Steve Blair to let him ask that question, what do you really want to do? How do people get a hold of you? How do they find you today?
Yeah, 2 ways. One, LinkedIn is where I'm spending most of my time. Okay. And second, at the bowling alley in Fayetteville on Saturday mornings.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good.
I'm always there, and I'm always looking for somebody to have some bacon and hash browns with.
I love that.
But LinkedIn is the serious way to really get a hold of me.
Well, I love that. Well, hey, all joking aside, listen, if you're looking for an opportunity to spend time at the bowling alley or to have some time one-on-one, don't hesitate to reach out to Steve, because I know it would be a great conversation. Steve, thanks for today.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks for listening to Push Go, a podcast highlighting the defining moments that impact how we live and work. It was great to have Steve on the show today. If you like what you heard, you can find more stories just like this on listen.plumshop.com. And hey, we wouldn't be mad if you left us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We have new episodes that drop every Wednesday. And if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe. Now we have a quick PS, which is our weekly segment where I give you a brief update on something happening at Plum. Today, I want to focus on one of our Plum providers. It's Go Rogue X. Sound familiar? They're the producers of this podcast, so it just might. But the digital media experts at Go Rogue X don't stop at podcast production. Hey, they even create attention-grabbing product videos, and now they're offering a turnkey product of video solutions on Plum. Now you can head to plumshop.com and use the code PUSHGO, that's PUSHGO, and check out for $100 off any project.